I have made it my mission to empower women to reach their full potential, whether it be as the CEO of an organization or an entrepreneur, a solopreneur, or as part of their team. In She Unplugged, the podcast, I'm telling the stories of women and men, their success, their loss, their transformation, and how they got to the place where they are right now. And today I'm very, very pleased to bring to you Michelle May. Michelle is a recovering yo-yo dieter. That's what she's saying about herself. And the founder of Emma Hungry, mindful eating program and training. She's also the author of the book Eat What You Love and Love What You Eat, which is a book series that teaches mindful eating to help individuals resolve mindless and emotional eating. And we know it all. We have all been there. I certainly have. So I'm very much looking forward to the conversation with Michelle and to learn from her how I can eat what I love and love what I eat. Hi, Michelle.
Hello. So nice to speak with you, Anya.
So let me just start straight there. Mindful eating. I think a lot of people know already the term mindfulness and mindful meditation. What is actually mindful eating? What does that mean?
Yeah, that's a great question because you could make a lot of assumptions, and I think some people misuse the term. The way they use it really sounds more like obsessive eating, being very mindful of everything you put in your mouth. That's not the way that I interpret it. So my favorite definition of mindfulness is intention and attention. And so if we think about eating, we just simply are applying intention and attention to our eating. So that is awareness and purpose. And wouldn't a bit more awareness and more purpose brought to our eating help us make decisions that are not so much about weighing, measuring, counting, and logging food, but about eating in a way that leaves us feeling better when we're done than we did when we started?
I'm glad I actually asked the question. Paying attention to what we eat and feeling better about having eaten something afterwards.
Well, and let me add, it's not just what we eat, but more important, it's why we're eating in the first place. I mean, so often, especially nowadays, people eat because food is around, or maybe they're bored or stressed, or other people are eating, or it's time. There's a thousand reasons that we eat, and many of them have nothing to do with our body's needs. And so understandably, if I eat when I'm bored, I have something to do for a little while, but then when I stop eating, I'm bored again. And so I have to eat again. And so people end up in a cycle of trying to use food for reasons other than meeting their body's fuel and nourishment and enjoyment needs. And they find themselves eating a lot more than their body needs and still not feeling satisfied.
I think there are a lot of beliefs in there, what you just covered, and I might be guilty of a couple of them. When I grew up, I was always told it's really important to have breakfast. Mm-hmm. You don't leave the house without having eaten breakfast. Now, I'm a mom of two, and luckily beliefs are passed down the line of the generation. So I did for a long time the same thing with my daughters. You know, we would sit down for breakfast, and then they became teenagers, and it was like, oh, I'm not hungry. I'm trying now to say, well, if you're not hungry, okay. But is that the right approach now? What beliefs do we need to wipe off the table?
I love that. I love that specific example. It's a wonderful one because we've all heard that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And it makes sense because you are breaking the fast, the overnight fast. However, What it really does is it sets up an artificial rule about eating that may or may not match somebody's preferences or lifestyle. And so I think what mindfulness does for us is it brings a lot more flexibility. Instead of following rules made up by our mother or rules made up by the latest diet expert, mindfulness is an inside out approach. So the example that you gave of your daughter saying, I'm not hungry. Well, it could be that when she's gets up a little bit late, racing around, maybe worrying about getting all of her books and everything together or what's coming up, that or maybe even has some coffee or some other caffeine source. It could be that she's not aware of hunger because of everything else that's going on. And in that case, perhaps if she takes something that's convenient to eat in an hour or so when she notices she's hungry, then it'll serve the exact same purpose. There's no need to eat breakfast the moment your feet hit the floor. So I think mindfulness, mindful eating really gives us a much more flexible approach that isn't about following rules. But let me add something here. You said something that I think is really important. You said, I used to have my daughters, we'd sit down and eat breakfast together. I think sitting down to eat together as a family or as a unit is really important. It's a very nurturing and nourishing aspect of eating that's been lost in our rush around society. And so perhaps the importance of eating breakfast had a lot more to do with sitting down, checking in with your family, what was happening today, what are you looking forward to, anything we need to know about, those kinds of things. I mean, that's a very important aspect of eating together too.
That's true. And we have always made a point of actually sitting down for the meals. I mean, it's a bit of a struggle as a working mom, especially also when they come back from school at lunchtime. But what I'm learning is to actually trust the feeling my daughters have in themselves to either eat something because they're hungry, or actually what I've started doing is like, I said, okay, if you don't want a piece of bread, how about a fruit? How about this? So it's not a rush. Well, teenagers, it is always right. But it's not a rushed situation. So it's not that they don't feel it, and it's not coffee because neither of them drinks coffee. Right. But what I'm really hearing is I need to learn to trust their own feeling and maybe offer them to take something along into school that they could eat an hour later.
Yes, exactly. Because here's the thing, Anya, we're not raising children, we're raising adults. And one of the very important skills that adults need is the ability to know when their body needs fuel. If we're eating because it's time, because somebody told us, because everybody else is eating, because we saw a commercial, because there's food around, we may end up eating many, many, many more times a day than when we actually need food. And so I think you're exactly right. To respect her ability to know when she's hungry and to be able to meet that need is really important as she enters adulthood and is responsible for her own decisions. Now, the other beauty of mindfulness is that we are also aware of the effects of our decisions. So as we begin to tune in, let's say that she says that she doesn't want to eat mainly because she's just in a hurry, or maybe unfortunately she's worried about her weight or something else. Then she rushes out of the house without eating, and a short time later she notices that her stomach is growling and she's irritable and she can't focus in class. Now mindfulness has given us the ability to become aware of even the mistakes that we make. So the next time you say, hey, let's have breakfast, she says, yeah, okay, and sits down and eats with you. Do you see how we can use the information, the awareness that awareness of the information our body is giving us to help us make decisions without following rules?
Eating is such a big topic between teenagers, or the lack thereof. Where how much are we needing to trust our children that they know exactly what they need?
Mm.
And also hearing the growling of the stomach and learning from that and doing something else. And at the same time, staying within our responsibility of noticing when the sentence, I'm not hungry, is becoming something else.
Yes. Yes. And so I think you've really hit on something that's important here. And that is that this is really the essence of the issue that many of the people I work with have. So many of the people I work with are adults already, but they tell stories about how this started when they were a teenager. Unfortunately, in our very body conscious culture, there's a lot of pressure, probably more so on women, but on men as well. There's a lot of pressure on young women to attain or maintain a certain body type. And that unfortunately gets in the way of the ability to listen to what we need and how to take care of ourselves. And so one of the things that I end up spending a lot of time when I'm working with women who are in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70s and 80s is that they've spent a lifetime of trying to control what they eat in order to control their body. And so, what I love so much about mindful eating is that it is not about being in control. And here's why that's important. Because being in control, if you think of the image of the yo-yo that we use for dieting, that's about, monitoring and weighing and measuring and logging and looking things up, right? There's all of this control around food. And what happens is for many people, the more they try to control their food, the more they find themselves in the opposite, where then they give up control or lose control or feel out of control. And then the yo-yo goes up and down and up and down, and it doesn't find a balance in the middle. What mindful eating can do for us is it teaches us that instead of trying to control our food and count every bite that we eat or giving up control and eating everything in sight, it's about being in charge, where I'm making decisions in every moment that are right for me right now. So certainly noticing how hungry I am is one helpful piece of information that can help me decide about eating. Noticing when I'm getting full and stopping, even if there's still food left on our plate, which was another rule that many of us learned from our parents, that we had to clean our plate to earn dessert or be a good girl, right? And so we can use this information to help us decide how much to eat and when to eat. But the piece of this that I think is so valuable that really goes counter to this idea of trying to change our bodies is to recognize that bodies come in all shapes and sizes. And that although there is a lot of pressure to attain a certain body size and shape, is it really worth all of the energy that we're spending obsessing about food and not using that energy to live the vibrant life that we crave, to do the things that we love, to wear the clothes that we want, and so on?
That is important to hear, especially because as soon as you realize you're getting out of that control, the inner critic is having a blast, and the bad feelings, the bad self-talk, the putting ourselves down, oh God, now you ate that chocolate again, aren't you, whatever, that is not helping. That is not helping. Now,
Exactly. So this is, if we could just stay on that for a minute, because I think you've really touched on something. I certainly experienced it for many years myself when I was doing a lot of yo-yo dieting. So we think that this guilt is going to help us stay in control. But what it really does is it keeps us stuck, focused on behaviors and old habits and patterns. We can't move forward when we're stuck with guilt, because when we say something like, well, I've already blown it, I might as well keep eating, we end up adding more fuel to that fire. I call it the eat, repent, repeat cycle. So we eat, we feel bad, we repent, we restrict and deprive, which makes us crave food even more. There's actually physiological changes that make us more attentive to food. We're hungrier, food tastes better, and we have a harder time stopping when we've had enough. And so it becomes this vicious cycle. When we can recognize the cycle and realize that actually the restriction and deprivation are part of the problem, we then are more in charge of our eating. Now, I might sometimes make a mistake and eat too much and feel regretful, but there's a huge difference between regret, which means, oh, I wish I hadn't eaten so much. Why did I do that? And guilt. Oh, I'm such a bad person. I'll never get this right. I'll never figure this out. I'll never be worthy. That's a very different conversation, because regret opens the door for us to learn something from what just happened, and maybe we'll make a different choice next time.
And there's even another emotion that came to my mind, shame.
Yes.
Because
Yes,
as soon
absolutely.
as we go down that lane and we feeling shame because we ate something, it turns into a secret. And then people having food in secret places and hide it away and eat it alone when nobody sees them. And shame is, for me, in terms of the negative emotions, it's rock bottom. There's not much else that you can do then.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not just shame about the food, but so many people experience body shame and shame about the secret eating. And again, it just feeds the cycle, because here's the thing. If you're a person who eats to soothe your emotions, what greater emotion that needs soothing than shame? So again, we may end up finding ourselves stuck there.
Have you always done that work? Did you always know these things? I mean, you did touch on it. I mean, you'd say you are a recovering yo-yo dieter.
Mm.
What was your journey like? Where did you start off?
I actually call myself a recovered yo-yo dieter, because I have no vestiges of that, or vestiges of that life left. I have no place in my life for that pattern. But for many years, that was my life. In fact, I started dieting when I was a teenager. So the questions you're asking are right on point for me. I had a lot of body image concerns back then. And I dieted all the way through high school. I dieted into college, university, and then I went to medical school, and I was still yo-yo dieting. And so it really wasn't until I got into my medical practice and I began to hear a lot of my patients talking about the same experiences. And that caused me to think, well, no, wait a minute. If I'm doing it and they're doing it, and clearly, if I could get through medical school, I'm smart enough to know better what's going on here. And then I had small children, and I would watch these little beings eat with complete enjoyment and abandon. And then when they were full, they just stopped. They had no attachment to food at all when they weren't hungry. I mean, even if there were cookies present, if they'd just eaten, it didn't have any attraction. They trusted they could have cookies when they were hungry later. And so that was really a wake-up call for me, that each one of us is born with the instinctive ability to know when our body needs fuel and to stop when we've had enough, and then to go play and grow and learn and have fun and use up the energy that we've consumed until we're hungry again. And through the process of dieting and yo-yo dieting, I had lost that ability to listen to my own body's wisdom about how to care for myself. And so that journey back for me was really what led me to do this work now. And eventually, I even left my medical practice to do this full time.
This is also what I heard, that small children just know what to eat and how much to eat. And I remember when our children were small, I made a point of having the sort of the chocolate and the sweet corner not hidden away. They always knew where it was, and there was no key, there was no opening hour, so to speak. It was always there because I never wanted them to feel, oh my God, I need to just shove it in now. God knows when I get chocolate or cookies again. Did I do that right then?
You did it so right. I wish more parents had that intuitive understanding about that, because our diet culture has really caused parents to not only be fearful about their own eating, but to be very fearful about their children and very controlling. The control efforts that so many parents try actually backfire, just as you described. That the studies even show us that kids who don't get those kinds of foods on a regular basis, where they've been put up on a pedestal, actually crave those foods more. And when they're away from their parents, for example, over at a friend's house who has a sweet corner, they can't stop eating. And then they feel guilty about it, but they don't want to tell their parents because their parents have made it a shameful act, or an act that they have to earn, or that happens very rarely. And so it seems counterintuitive, but the truth is that if we make certain foods special or good, our brain actually spends a lot more time trying to negotiate this, and we actually end up giving certain foods, particularly the bad foods, and I'm using air quotes there because I don't believe there are good and bad foods, but we end up giving them more power, not less. It has actually the exact opposite effect that parents hope for, and adults who have been yo-yo dieting and have their own internal list of good and bad foods. It actually gives those foods even more power. So you're thinking about them all the time, trying to avoid them. And then when you finally eat them, you're saying to yourself, well, I won't eat this tomorrow. I might as well eat it all and get it out of the house because tomorrow I'm going to be good. And then the cycle continues.
That's true. But now maybe I made another mistake because I did have the chocolate and cookie corner, and that was always available. At the same time, there are certain foods that I will not buy, where I totally disagree with the food itself. So certain sweet drinks. I'm not naming any names.
You don't have to. It's interesting because what you're talking about here is, I think, a very important subtlety here. So the name of my book series is Eat What You Love, Love What You Eat. But eat what you love doesn't necessarily mean that you eat everything. It doesn't mean that you have to eat sweet drinks or drink sweet drinks. It means that you get to choose what foods you love. Now, the thing about young children is they learn what to like and what to eat based on what they're fed. So, an example, I live in the United States. Many young children don't even know what lentils are, but there are parts of the world where that's a main food staple for young children, and they love them and they enjoy them and they eat them regularly. So what you expose your children to really develops their preferences. So giving your children unsweetened tea is perfectly fine. Probably they won't even like the sweetened version at some point. Now, maybe the difference is that we're not saying sweet tea and other certain sweetened beverages are bad foods and you shouldn't eat them. We're just saying, in our family, we like our tea unsweetened. It's not about making the food bad. It's about making a choice. It's about having a preference. So it's a very subtle difference, but I think it's an important difference. Similar to your family valuing sitting down together and eating, that may not be a value that all families subscribe to, and it will have its own effects on children in the future as well.
It's good that you underlined that. And I want to talk about your book series, Eat What You Love and Love What You Eat.
So Eat What You Love, Love What You Eat is really two parts. The first part is the eat what you love part. It's what we've been talking about. I call it a non-diet approach or an anti-diet approach. It says that basically when you make a lot of rules about what you should and shouldn't eat, you end up in conflict with these rules. People end up in this love-hate relationship with food. So what I try to do in the book is give you a new way of making decisions about food that doesn't make the food good or bad. It puts you in charge of your decision-making process. So we're not looking up a list of foods that we're allowed to eat, but we're paying attention to what we enjoy and what nourishes our body and what we have available. Do we like to cook? What's our, what can we afford to eat? So it's not me telling people what they should do. It's them fitting what they want to do into their life. So that's the eat what you love part. The love what you eat part is what you're referring to, which is this mindfulness aspect of eating. Now, it may or may not be eating slowly, but to your point, the brain can only focus fully on one thing at a time. So if I'm scrolling through my phone or watching TV and eating, it's very likely that within a few moments, my attention will be on the external activity. It will not be on tasting the food, noticing how full I'm getting, noticing when the enjoyment stops and I'm just eating out of habit to clean my plate. So when we slow down, when we pay full attention to the meal, and I don't mean like eating in silence with a candle. I mean, I'm talking about sitting down, maybe with your family, eating a bite of food, having a little conversation, putting your fork down between bites. Because after all, if you're eating a bite of food and loading your next bite of food, which one are you paying attention to? The next one, always the next one. You're never eating the bite of food that's in your mouth. And so loving what you eat is slowing down, minimizing distractions, giving eating the full attention that it deserves so that you enjoy the food you eat and you notice how your body's responding to it.
I really love that. And now the title of the book is much clearer because it's really two sides to the story. What is your position on certain eating structures? Let's just go Ayurveda. And I bring that example because in Ayurveda, you're a certain body type. And I was told certain foods that I actually really love don't agree with my body type. So what is your position on that way of looking at food?
Well, the beautiful thing about mindful eating, at least the way that I approach it, is that I don't see it as my job to tell you what's good for your body type. My job is not to tell you which foods you should and shouldn't eat, or even which foods are healthy or unhealthy, because after all, I've been around long enough now to remember when fat was considered the enemy and carbs were the good thing, and now it's completely switched. What that tells me is that nutrition information is a moving target, and the best thing that we can do is figure out what works for us. So if you take Ayurveda and you take that example that you gave, you could conduct some experiments for yourself. Be curious about this for your body. Say, so this is what they're saying. Let me try it out and see how I feel. Do I miss the foods that I love so much that it hardly makes it worth the minuscule improvement that I notice? Or do I feel so much better when I follow this eating pattern? And it could be anything. It could be intermittent fasting or low carb, or it could simply be about eating a balanced diet, which is my favorite eating plan, right? Is just balance, variety, and moderation. But using your own awareness of how your body responds to decide whether this is something that works for you. Because after all, an inside out approach means that this is something that you notice helps you feel better and function your best.
And I think that is one of the important things, is really to relearn or to re-listen to what's going on inside.
We may not be born with the ability to know a baby needs certain protein and micronutrients and other things. I mean, the babies may not intuitively know that. However, as their parent, we can provide the foods that they need, but do it in a way that respects their own hunger and satiety, feeding them, especially a young infant, feeding on demand, and then allowing them to say, I'm done. You know, a baby, when you're trying to make it finish that last little bit of baby food because you don't want to waste it in the jar, if they're pulling away, they're saying, I'm finished. And if you force it in any way, they may very well spit it back at you. They know when they've had enough. And trying to play games with them and the airplane or saying that they're a good boy or a good girl inadvertently can override their own ability to know when they've had enough. And in our food abundant environment, it's very, very important for us to be able to tell when we've had enough, because there's, for many of us, more than enough food to eat.
Yeah, I'm guilty of the airplane.
Me too. And it's not guilt, it's just this awareness that, yeah, sometimes we are trying to override the baby's ability to really just eat what they need for our own convenience. If you eat this, maybe you won't wake me up in an hour or two to have more. So
In the current situation, I mean, we are recording the podcast in February 2021. We are still, at least in Europe, and I know you over there too, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. From hearsay, I have noticed more and more people struggling now with food because they're at home and food is available. Have you seen any change? Have you heard from people how they cope now, and what is your advice?
well, I think it's a great observation. So it's complex. It's partly food availability. You're just steps away from the kitchen and the food is right there. It also has to do with the fact that pleasure is an important aspect of our lives. And with the pandemic and quarantining and closing down restaurants and limiting our social activities with friends and family, we've decreased one form of pleasure that all of us were really, I think, taking for granted up until now. And so, as we have fewer options for pleasure, at least the ones that we're used to, food becomes a very easy way to attempt to fill that hole. Now, I say attempt because food is pleasurable temporarily, but it doesn't have that lasting pleasure that maybe a social connection does, or doing something with family and friends. And so people end up having to redose themselves, go back to the kitchen again and again to try to get the pleasure that they aren't feeling other places. So I think it's very common, and it's a little more complex than just availability. So when I'm working with people who are struggling with this, we talk a lot about other ways to fill themselves up in addition to food. Food can still be pleasurable. In fact, now is a great time, and many people are doing this, of learning to cook or making things from scratch, maybe sitting down with the people in their bubble to enjoy a meal. So in some ways, food has become a really wonderfully nourishing, connecting avenue. So what we want to do then is also look for other ways. Myself, I've been painting more, I've been hiking more, I've been looking for other ways to fill myself up so that food isn't my primary option.
That is really, really important. I want to underline that. It's about the pleasure and finding other ways, other means of feeling that pleasure, whatever that might be. It could be also reading a book or getting on the phone with a friend, because you are underlying the lack of the social connections. We do have phones. They still work. Pick up the phone and call a girlfriend and talk.
Absolutely. And that's it. It's really, I think this aspect of mindful eating is not about eating less. It's about living more. And that boils down to figuring out how else can I take care of myself? What is the underlying need here that I'm attempting to meet with food, and food isn't working as well as I wish it would? So what else can I do to try to take care of this need for connection, for pleasure, for comfort, for relaxation, for less stress? How else do I do? Maybe this is a great time to learn to meditate, or to remember to pause and take a few deep breaths, or, as you say, to reach out, maybe to people that I care about, maybe to get some help, some professional help if that's what I'm needing. But it's really about learning how to take care of myself. And really, I teach the people that I work with that it's about building a self-care buffer zone. The more we care for ourselves, the more buffer we have to endure the things that are inevitably going to come up. This last year has been one of those situations that none of us could have ever seen coming. But for those who have a good self-care buffer zone and a lot of tools in their toolbox for taking care of themselves, it becomes just one more thing that we figure out how to deal with. And we have the resilience to move beyond the food as our only source of pleasure, and we trust that when this is over, we're going to appreciate our lives a lot more because we know now what we lost for a while.
It's so true. People talk about which restaurant they go first to.
Oh, I understand.
That is very true. Now, if somebody out there would like to make the shift, would like to move away from yet the next diet. I mean, we're still in February, so a lot of the New Year's resolutions are around food, are around fitness, are around losing the weight. Imagine somebody listening to the podcast and says, okay, this makes actually sense and I've never tried it. What could be one of the first two steps, apart from getting your book, and I definitely will link the book underneath the podcast, I will make that. But what are the first maybe few steps somebody can take towards that mindful eating?
I love the question, because one of the things that's different about mindful eating versus a diet is that a diet is this massive overhaul where you clean out your cabinets and you change the entire way you and your family eats. And for many people, it becomes completely unsustainable. Mindful eating is actually a slow build where we literally start with one step. And I would say that one of the best steps is to first increase your awareness, and do this by every time that you notice that you feel like eating, just pause for a moment and ask yourself, am I actually hungry? So, do I have physical symptoms that my body needs fuel? A good example of this is if you were driving down the freeway, highway, motorway, you call it a motorway, you were driving down the road and you saw a gas station, petrol station, fuel station, whatever, right? A little translation there. If you saw a gas station, you wouldn't immediately pull off the road and fill up. You'd first check your fuel gauge. And that's what I'm suggesting, is that when you feel like eating, check your fuel gauge. Does my body actually have any signs or symptoms that it needs fuel? In other words, do I feel my stomach growling? Am I noticing my energy dipping? Am I even getting a little bit irritable or hangry or headachy or shaky, which is a pretty extreme symptom of hunger? But do I have signs that my body actually needs fuel right now? If I do, then the next decision is deciding what to eat. If I don't, then the next decision is, well, am I going to eat anyway, knowing that fuel isn't actually what my body needs right now? And if I decide I'm not going to eat anyway, then I might actually spend some time trying to figure out, well, then why do I want to eat? Am I just bored? Is it time for me to stand up from my desk? Am I thirsty? Is it time for me to take a few deep breaths or pick up the phone or do something else right now? Because then ultimately what's happening is we start figuring out when our body needs fuel and when our body needs other activities or self-care or something as simple as a sip of water.
And I have noticed, I started a while back this intermittent fasting, and I really enjoy the feeling of my stomach growling. I never thought I would enjoy it, but it's like, oh, you're hungry. Because before I don't think I was aware of being hungry because I would just eat. Now there's a growling, oh, I'm hungry. That's good.
That means I'm going to be eating. So I want to be clear about that. So I don't promote intermittent fasting. I don't promote any form or pattern of eating in particular. I think everybody figures out what works best for them. So I do want to be clear about that. But what I love about what you're saying is something that my grandmother used to say. She said, "Hunger is the best seasoning." Hunger is the best seasoning. In other words, when I'm hungry, food tastes even better. It holds my attention and it's meeting the purpose it was intended for, which is to give my body the fuel that I need to go on and live the rest of my day. When we're eating on autopilot, as you were describing, eating because it's time or eating just out of habit or eating for reasons other than hunger, not only does food not taste as good, but it's not as satisfying, which is why we can eat so much more and feel stuffed afterward, because it's not really meeting the purpose of taking care of our fuel needs. So it takes a lot of food to fill me up when I'm stressed out. Doesn't take that much food to fill me up when I'm actually hungry and needing fuel, surprisingly.
Something else I would like to ask you, because you did mention it before, would it also be one of the first steps, especially now when we are all at home, to start a little new rule? We are at the table all together, sitting down for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and the phones are away. I know that's revolutionary.
So again, I'm not one to make rules for other people, but you can certainly make rules for yourself and your family. And that's a rule at in our family as well, that when we are sitting down to a meal together, we don't need our phones. Everything we need is right there in front of us. The people that we need to connect with, the food that we're eating, the conversation that we're having. There is nothing going on out in the world that is more important than this present moment of being together. So that would have to be a rule you'd negotiate for yourself. I wouldn't make that for you, but if it made sense and you could, figure out a way to help underscore the value and the purpose of it, I love it. I think it sounds like a great practice.
Well, I mean, in our house, there are no phones allowed. I do say that I put my foot down. It's a lot of things I negotiate with my children. There are certain things I'm putting my foot down. No, we don't need a phone right now. But I'm just wondering, because when I was a student, I remember I was eating on my own, and I would have the bad habit of eating in front of the TV.
Yes.
I can confess that.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started having a family, it was a clear decision. No, I do not want to have that habit anymore. TV is off. I mean, there are always, and that's like what we said earlier, there are always exceptions. When we sit down to watch a movie and we have popcorn, of course we eat.
Absolutely. I love you pointing that out again, because mindfulness, this mindful eating approach is about flexibility. It's not about rigid rules. The beauty of setting that kind of baseline though for your family, for my family, my kids are adults now. And when we dine together, or when back in the day when we could go out to eat, when they see other people or even other family members or friends with their phone at the table, they will later say, I don't get it. Why are they doing that? I mean, to them, it appears rude. It appears so they have internalized that value. It's no longer a rule. It's something that they recognize as being important and valuable. So as parents, again, we are not raising children, we're raising adults, and we're really giving them a skill set for making decisions about how they want to show up in the world.
So we have a few tips. Now help me out here. When I start a journey like that, I'm probably not in the position where I love my body at the beginning.
Mm.
And we did talk about it. There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of, well, looking in the mirror is a hard thing for a lot of women, especially. Some men too, but for a lot of women. How can anybody who starts on that journey support themselves while being on the journey with that shame, with that negative self-talk, with that, I don't want to look in the mirror? What can they do?
Well, this has become a big piece of my work over the last decade. So I wasn't aware of this initially, but the more I do this work, the more I realize that as we reject ourselves, we reject the body that we're in, we compare ourselves to others, or as we age, as we compare ourselves to our younger self, we are constantly rejecting the body that we have now. As a physician who did many, many physical exams and saw many, many people without their clothing on, I want to tell all of you that you are perfectly normal, that there is a range of body sizes and shapes. That is the way it has always been. It is the way it will always be, that no matter how hard you try, we are not all going to fit into the small 4% of people who happen to have the idealized body shape and size, and for that matter, color of skin, age, wealth, and many other external factors that our culture has decided are ideal and sell us a lot of crap in order to get us to think that we might attain that. And so I'm on my soapbox here for a moment to say that I think one of the gifts that we can give the world, and more importantly ourselves, is to be fully who we are in the body that we have now, and to not waste another moment postponing our lives until we've changed our body to fit the cultural ideal. And if our body changes in the future, then fine, we live in that new body as well. I just think that and it's not easy to do. It's not easy to do. But if you have a social media diet of people promoting workouts and strict eating plans and showing their abs, and unsubscribe to those feeds, because what they're doing is they're filling your head with dissatisfaction. Instead, look for the things that fill you up, the things that inspire you, the beautiful places on our planet, the passions, the animals, and the causes, and the things that you can do that actually are meaningful. Because trying to change our body to fit the thin ideal is really keeping us stuck, wasting all the energy that we could be using in our lives for things that really do matter.
I'm glad that you said it like that. Yes, we are all different, and I think it's a large step towards self-love. Accepting, I mean, that's my daily mantra. To love myself the way I am right now, to accept myself the way I am right now, loving who I am today and the way I look today. And I do know I personally have to tell myself that every day.
Absolutely, because we live in a culture that doesn't want us to believe that. We live in a culture with messages that tell us everything but. And it's not just about bodies, of course, it's about all kinds of things. And it's not easy. I understand that living in a body that doesn't fit the idealized version can lead to discrimination and stigma and pain. But let's not add on to that. We can't control what the rest of the world says or does, but we don't need to add on to that suffering by sending that message from our own brain. I love that affirmation, that mantra of accepting yourself as you are. And for some of us, that may eventually even grow to self-love too.
Michelle, at the end of the podcast, I always ask the same question. Was there a question you wished I had asked and I didn't? You could answer that now. Or is there something where you say, I would really like to underline it? That's my most important message.
I think the most important message is that it is about living a big, vibrant life. You crave that life, you want that life. The big lie in our culture is that you will get that life when you change your body and eat a certain way, but it doesn't work like that. That life is available to you right now in the body that you have right now. So, what small thing could you do today that would bring you energy and joy and pleasure? What could you do? What small step could you take that would help you approach that life that you've been told you could have if you change the body you have now?
Michelle, from the bottom of my heart, it is a topic that has followed me around, I think, like for a lot of girls forever and ever.
Mm-hmm.
I've gone through, I'm too thin, I'm too big, I'm too tall, I'm too fat.
Too, yes.
Everything. I think there must have been, I try to remember a time in my life when I just said, I'm fine. And it's really hard to find those 5 days. And
well, and that's the point, right? Because the outer definition is never going to be good enough. And so we have to change the definition. When the message is I'm too, finally at some point from an inside out place, we have to begin to remind ourselves that we are enough as we are right now.
Yes, and that's the perfect line at the end of a lovely conversation with you. Thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thank you for the gift of having this conversation with you and all of your listeners.